Namaskar, this is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas chief, the man behind the October 7th attack, is dead. What happens now? Will Prime Minister Netanyahu end the war? His allies say he must, but the Israeli Prime Minister has other plans. We'll discuss. Also look at how Israel killed Sinwar, a dramatic and dogged manhunt that lasted for more than a year, with drone footage of his final moments. Plus a report on how this war and geopolitical uncertainty is driving gold prices to record highs. Is Justin Trudeau China's man in Canada? The opposition says Beijing helped him win the last two elections. There's ample proof of Chinese meddling in Canada. Of course, the Prime Minister doesn't like to talk about it, but we will tonight. Meanwhile, the Chinese economy is tanking. They've posted the slowest growth in 18 months. In Ukraine, Zelensky's new ultimatum: either give him NATO membership or he'll turn to nuclear weapons. In Australia, Britain's Charles has landed for his first visit as king. He's the King of Australia too. One wonders why, and he's getting the royal snub from his subjects. How Africa is losing the narrative war thanks to negative coverage, and it costs them billions of dollars every year. And some food for thought on a Friday evening, unless you want to actually try it. The latest bizarre food combinations. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. North Korea will send more troops to support Russia's war in Ukraine, claims South Korea's spy agency. Seoul says Pyongyang has already sent more than 1,000 special forces to Russia's Far East. NATO says they cannot yet confirm the claims made by South Korea. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni lands in Lebanon. She is the first foreign head of state to visit the country since the escalation between Israel and Hezbollah started last month. Italy plays a significant role in the UN force stationed in southern Lebanon. In recent weeks, the UN peacekeepers have come under fire from Israel. South Africa orders Taiwan's representative office to relocate, asking them to move outside the capital, Pretoria. Taipei blames Chinese pressure for this decision. Beijing considers self-ruled Taiwan as part of its territory and wants to reduce the number of countries that recognize Taipei's claim to statehood. Kenyan President William Ruto names a new deputy, promotes his interior minister, but the Kenyan court has blocked this appointment. Ruto's current deputy was impeached in a historic vote. He is the first deputy president to be sacked in this manner in the country's history. And it's that time of the year again in India's national capital. Air pollution is rising in Delhi. Experts warn that the situation could deteriorate further over the weekend. Severe frothing also reported in the Yamuna River as parts of the river are blanketed in pungent foam.
While this is not the end of the war in Gaza, it's the beginning of the end.
Do you feel more hopeful about a ceasefire?
It's a big victory for Israel. The year-long manhunt has finally ended, and that too successfully. Because Yahya Sinwar has been killed, the chief of Hamas and the mastermind of October 7th. He had evaded Israel for months, pulled off many escapes, but finally Israel hunted him down. They've released a video of his final moments. Take a look at this first. This video has divided the world. Palestinian supporters say it's a defiant last stand, especially him throwing that stick. But Israel and its allies disagree. They say, what a pathetic end, dying alone and caked in dust. We'll get to the Israeli operation later. First, we're looking at the fallout. For Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, this is a big boost because Yahya Sinwar was enemy number one. Killing him was the ultimate revenge. So his death is being celebrated by Israelis. Even the Prime Minister joined in. He shared a drink with his advisors to mark the day. Such moments are rare in war. It tells you how important Yahya Sinwar was. Israel had already taken out multiple Hamas leaders, so Sinwar was among the last few left, in fact. His death leaves Hamas rudderless. The question is, how will Israel use this moment, this victorious moment? A lot of countries would probably quit after this. After all, this is a great exit ramp. You've demonstrated your power. You've taken out the top leader or leaders, if you count the previous Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh and Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah. So this is the perfect chance to negotiate a ceasefire, to get the hostages back and to stop the fighting. That's what most countries would do. But Israel is not most countries. Netanyahu says the war will go on. He won't stop until all the hostages are back.
Well, this is not the end of the war in Gaza. It's the beginning of the end. To the people of Gaza, I have a simple message. This war can end tomorrow. It can end if Hamas lays down its arms and returns our hostages.
There are 101 hostages in Gaza and their fate hangs in the balance. Netanyahu has put the ball in Hamas's court. He says surrender and the war ends. But Hamas remains defiant. They say Sinwar's death will not weaken their movement. Instead, it will make Hamas stronger, and that Sinwar will become an icon. And they are right about that. People in Gaza and West Bank are mourning him. They're calling Yahya Sinwar a martyr.
It will not affect the interest of the country. After the leader, 1,000 of leaders will come, and after the man, 1,000 men will come.
Sinwar is like any martyr. There will be somebody that comes after him. The Prophet Muhammad, after he died, there were people to speak about his religion.
We've seen it during previous assassinations as well, whether it was Qasem Soleimani in 2019 or Ismail Haniyeh in June this year or Hassan Nasrallah in September this year. Their deaths did not de-escalate the conflict. They had the opposite effect. So strategically, this is a very tense period. Israel could use it to continue their assault. Hamas could use it to plot revenge. Basically, anything could happen, which is why Israel's Western allies are worried. All of them celebrated Sinwar's death, but they also had advice for Netanyahu. Now's the time to wind up.
Good day for the world. I called Netanyahu to congratulate him getting Sinwar, and I told him that we were really pleased with his actions, and further that now's the time to move on. Move toward a ceasefire in Gaza.
Today is marked by the death of Yahya Sinwar, and this day is both a turning point and a military success for Israel. This occasion must be seized so that all the hostages can be freed and the war finally stopped.
So the West senses an opportunity here, a chance to push Netanyahu towards a ceasefire. Meanwhile, on the ground, the fighting continues. Israel launched 150 strikes on Thursday. That's Gaza plus Lebanon. In Lebanon, the fighting is intense. We're talking about door-to-door combat. Israel lost 5 soldiers on Thursday. 2 of their tanks were also destroyed this week. So clearly the cost is mounting. Reports say 55 Israeli soldiers have been killed in Lebanon. Nearly 500 have been injured. The Israeli military has released footage of their operations. It sums up the nature of this war. Risky and close quarters. Netanyahu will have to be mindful of that. Families of the hostages are already unhappy with him. The last thing he needs is military casualties. And Hezbollah knows this. They have announced a new phase of fighting, apparently a more aggressive phase. It's not really clear what that means, but Hezbollah has hinted at using new kinds of weapons. Over in Gaza, it's the same story. Israel is sending more soldiers to northern Gaza, specifically to the Jabalia camp. Reports say Hamas fighters are regrouping there. So Israel is looking to crack down. It won't be easy though, because as long as Sinwar was alive, Netanyahu had a target, something with a face and location to hunt. But now that's gone. His next goal is arguably more difficult than this one, to eliminate Hamas, an enemy with no face or location. The Prime Minister of Israel is running out of excuses to extend this war. Let's see what his next move will be. So how did Israel find Yahya Sinwar? Was it a pager bomb or some cutting-edge satellite imagery? What Mossad magic ended this hunt? Well, as it turned out, it was sheer luck. Yahya Sinwar was killed in a chance encounter, not a targeted operation. Let me tell you how it unfolded. Israel has been tracking Sinwar since October last year. It's been a ruthless manhunt, one that has razed Gaza to the ground, also left 42,000 people dead. Yet they could not pinpoint Sinwar's location. All they knew was this, that Yahya Sinwar was somewhere in the southern city of Rafah. Now, Rafah is pretty big. The total size is more than 64 square kilometers. It's also home to 1 million people. So finding Sinwar in Rafah was never going to be easy. Which brings us to Wednesday. This Wednesday, an Israeli team was patrolling a part of Rafah, an area called Tal al-Sultan. Suddenly, the team encountered three adversaries. Naturally, they engaged them. And during this gunfight, the three opponents split up. One of them ran into an abandoned building. That's when Israel switched to drones. You just saw that video. The drone found a man slumped in a chair. His head was covered and he was surrounded by debris. At that point, Israel did not know that this man was Yahya Sinwar. They thought it was a random Hamas fighter. Soon, Israeli tanks were called in. They fired rounds and razed the building, and that's how Yahya Sinwar was finally killed. Again, Israel did not know immediately. They thought the building or the body may have been strapped with bombs, so they left the site after the encounter. Then on Thursday morning, they returned to inspect the bodies. And that's when they spotted Sinwar. Of course, you can't go by looks alone. You must forensically confirm it. So a part of Sinwar's finger was removed. It was sent to Israel for testing. And when the results came, it was confirmed Israel's #1 enemy was dead. Later that day, his body was taken to Israel. It's not clear what happened after that or what they did to the body, but a lot of interesting facts do stand out here. For starters, how did they confirm Yahya Sinwar's DNA? Well, Sinwar spent nearly 30 years in Israeli jails, from the 1980s to 2011. During that time, he developed a brain tumor. He even had a surgery done in Israel. And because of this, they had a lot of his medical records, like his DNA and his dental reports. And that is how Israel identified Yahya Sinwar. They also found money on him, by the way. They found money on his body, nearly 40,000 shekels, which is around 10,000 US dollars. He also had a vest and a pistol with him. But why was Sinwar out in the open? Why wasn't he in the tunnels? You can give Israel credit for that. They were hunting relentlessly in Rafah, so Sinwar was trying to flee, to move further north.
The fact is that Sinwar probably stayed in that area, in the same underground area in the complex. We found his DNA a couple of 100 meters away from the tunnel where our 6 hostages were staying. He stayed in that area. Our forces closed the area for a long period of time, and I guess that he was on the run for a long period of time, moving from underground space to houses, and was trying to flee north to safer areas.
What about the hostages? Sinwar was said to be surrounded by human shields. Where did they go? Well, he may have abandoned them to move quicker, or maybe he lost them in the chaos. Either way, no hostages were found with Sinwar. His security detail was also light, like we said, just 2 men and him. Perhaps he thought that a small team could move quicker. But frankly, his fate was sealed. Not yesterday, not last week, but on October 7, 2023, when he ordered his men to massacre Israeli civilians. We all know what happened next. An intense cat-and-mouse game in Gaza. Yahya Sinwar had been preparing years for this attack. He knew the Israelis pretty well. He even spoke fluent Hebrew. And that is how he thwarted every Israeli attempt to track him. No gadgets, no public appearances, no direct contacts. Yahya Sinwar always lived in the shadows. He seemed one step ahead of the Israelis, but in the end, they tracked him down. You must admire Israel's ruthless dedication. But you must also question the cost. 42,000 civilians were collateral damage in this hunt. Nearly everything in Gaza is destroyed. Was the October 7th attack worth this carnage? Was killing Sinwar worth this carnage? It's a question that Israeli and Hamas leadership must ponder. A new Sinwar may emerge soon, but those Israeli and Palestinian families will never be whole again. So Israel's war is entering a new phase. Sinwar's death has created ripples, especially in the international market for gold. Gold prices are breaking records everywhere. International gold prices have crossed $2,700. That's for 1 ounce of gold. 1 ounce is around 28 grams. So $2,700 for 1 ounce. It's a lifetime high. Here in India, gold prices are on fire. 10 grams of pure gold costs almost 80,000 Indian rupees. That's about $951 US for 10 grams. This is the most expensive gold has ever been. The question is why? Why are prices so high? What is driving this surge? Mostly it is fear. Investors around the world are afraid. They have 3 big fears, 3 big concerns right now. First, the conflicts in Ukraine and West Asia. Second, the state of major economies. They're showing signs of weakness. Their growth numbers have been tepid. And third, the US presidential election. It is playing on the minds of investors. It's a tight race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. The election could swing either way, and the result will have implications for the whole world. So 2 wars, slowing economies, and the US election. On all these fronts, there's unpredictability. The final outcomes are hard to gauge. The risks are high, so investors want some insurance. They want to build a safety net around their investments, and gold can provide them that safety net. It is a time-tested hedge, which is why whenever there's a crisis, gold prices skyrocket. It happened in 2007 when the US triggered a global financial meltdown. The gold markets had collapsed, but gold prices, global markets rather, had collapsed, but gold prices shot up. From 2007 to 2011, gold prices effectively doubled. And then it happened again in 2020 during the Wuhan virus pandemic. Gold prices hit new records and touched new highs. It seems like 2024 is seeing a repeat. And it's not just investors. Central banks are also boosting their gold reserves. In the last 2 years, they have bought large amounts of gold, more than 2,000 tons to be exact. Which central banks are these that are accumulating gold? China, Brazil, Turkey, and Poland. They've all indulged in heavy buying of gold, and India's central bank is also part of this list. Since 2018, India's gold reserves have surged by more than 200%. India's central bank is called the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India. Do you know how much gold the RBI has? It's worth more than $65 billion, which is quite significant. Now, we all know why investors buy gold. Usually for capital protection, to balance potential losses in their portfolio. But why do central banks want more gold in their reserves? The World Gold Council released an assessment this year. They looked into this trend of central banks buying gold, and this is what they came up with. I'm quoting, "Extraordinary market pressure, unprecedented economic uncertainty, and political upheavals around the world have kept gold front of mind for central banks." So market pressure, economic uncertainty, and political upheavals, the same three fears that we just talked about. They're plaguing central banks too. And that is why the yellow metal is in demand. But in India, the high prices are dampening the festive spirit, the festive mood. Gold sellers say that there are few customers now. Some have even started offering discounts. They're cutting prices by $8 for 28 grams. Usually, it's the other way around. Festive season is when businesses expect their highest sales. And in India, Diwali is approaching. It's one of India's biggest festivals. Buying gold during this time is considered auspicious. But the sellers say the surging prices are driving customers away. So how long will the gold rally continue? Have the prices peaked, or is there still momentum? Honestly, it's hard to say. Developments over the next few weeks hold the answers.
Thank you all for being here.
Knowingly recognize this individual was a terrible mistake.
Will he take personal responsibility for this shame and
Now let's talk about Justin Trudeau. This week, his feud with India dominated the headlines, but in the past 2 days, a new scandal has surfaced, or should we say resurfaced, and Trudeau himself is at the center of it. He's been Canada's Prime Minister since the year 2015. He's serving his third term in office, which is an impressive record for any politician. But did Justin Trudeau win these elections with China's help? Canada's main opposition leader believes that is the case. His name is Pierre Poilievre. He's the leader of the Conservative Party in Canada. He has made some serious charges. 2 days back, he wrote a letter. It is on your screen. Let me quote a part of it, the part where Poilievre talks about the last 2 elections in Canada, where China apparently had a role to play. And this is what he wrote. Justin Trudeau, and I'm quoting, Justin Trudeau is lying to distract from a Liberal caucus revolt against his leadership and revelations he knowingly allowed Beijing to interfere and help him win 2 elections. So Poilievre says that China interfered in Canada's elections. Justin Trudeau looked the other way. In other words, Trudeau was complicit. That's the allegation from Pierre Poilievre, and it's not a new one. Leaders before Poilievre have made similar charges. It's a ghost from the past that keeps coming back to haunt Trudeau, but this time he's having trouble shaking it off. You see, Canada has been investigating this, the allegations of Chinese meddling. This investigation has been on for months. Unlike the case with India, where Trudeau launched a diplomatic war without proof, there is substantial proof of Chinese meddling in Canada. It was a wide-ranging operation. China tapped every available resource at its disposal. Chinese proxies in Canada, state entities, Chinese officials in Canada, the Chinese diaspora, even Chinese mouthpieces, all of them were mobilized for this mission. And Beijing had a clear goal: get friendly politicians elected to the Canadian Parliament, politicians who can push China's agenda, or at the very least, not stand in Beijing's way. And China had a clear preference here: Justin Trudeau and his Liberal Party. Beijing wanted them to win, so they tried to influence voters against the Conservatives. The Conservatives were viewed as anti-China, so they became targets of Chinese meddling. And this happened in the last 2 elections, in 2019 and then in the snap election in 2021. And don't take our word on this. This is what Canada's own intelligence agencies say, that there was Chinese meddling in the last 2 elections. In fact, I have some quotes from their assessment. It says, China clandestinely and deceptively interfered in Canadian elections. China is, and I'm quoting again, the most significant source of foreign interference in Canada, and Beijing acted in a sophisticated, pervasive, and persistent manner. China targeted Canadian politicians at all levels. And how many voters did they manage to sway? On this front, the assessment by Canadian agencies is inconclusive, but the Conservatives hold a different view. They believe that Chinese meddling definitely hurt them, and it cost the party at least 9 seats. That's according to Erin O'Toole. He led the Conservative Party until 2022. He says China's meddling hurt his political career. Again, I have a quote from him. This is what he says. The small number of seats would not have impacted the minority government that Canada has right now, but the difference of 2, 3, 5 seats may have allowed me more of a moral justification to remain as leader. So Erin O'Toole lost his post. And even after all of this, Justin Trudeau's Liberals ended up with a minority in the Canadian Parliament, but somehow he is still the Prime Minister. Then last year, another shocking revelation came out. It centered around a man called Han Dong. He's a sitting parliamentarian in Canada, of course. Dong has been accused of interfering on China's behalf. In 2021, he met a Chinese diplomat. He tried to block the release of 2 Canadians from a Chinese jail. Dong has denied these allegations, but guess which party gave him a ticket to contest? Trudeau's Liberal Party. Last year, when the story broke, Dong left the Liberal Party, but he holds his seat in Parliament as an independent. Imagine that. Canada has a sitting member of Parliament accused of foreign interference still in Parliament, but all Trudeau cares about is India. When the fact is that the threat from China is still high. Again, this is from their own defense minister, who says China has not stopped its interference.
I actually raised that concern of foreign interference and all the manifestations that it might take, including interference in our institutions, including our elections, but also actions of coercion against Chinese diaspora in Canada. They're our citizens.
That was Trudeau's Defence Minister Bill Blair. He made that statement earlier this year. The meddling allegations date back to the year 2019. It's been 5 years. In all these years, Canada has witnessed 2 elections and multiple reports corroborating the Chinese meddling. What has Justin Trudeau done to address the threat? He keeps underplaying it. So is he complicit? Is he benefiting from Chinese meddling in Canada? As Trudeau would put it, we don't have hard proof of his complicity. Perhaps the Canadians will investigate. So Trudeau has some difficult questions to answer. Meanwhile, China is struggling with its own challenges. Chinese economy has slipped into a deep slump. Beijing is trying to revive it. It has announced a series of measures in recent weeks, but nothing seems to be working. Fresh economic data came out today. From July to September, China grew by just 0.9%. I'll repeat that. July to September, Chinese growth 0.9%. This puts China's annual growth rate at just 3.6%.
Looking at the quarters, the GDP grew by 5.3% year-on-year in the first quarter, 4.7% in the second quarter, and 4.6% in the third quarter. On a quarter-on-quarter basis, the GDP grew by 0.9% in the third quarter.
China has reported its lowest growth rate in 18 months. It is far below their target. This year, China wanted to grow at the rate of 5%, but at this pace, they will most likely miss the target. This week, Morgan Stanley released an assessment. Morgan Stanley, as you would know, is an American bank. It says the Chinese economy is going through a deflationary spiral. Here's what it means. Imagine you work at a Chinese factory. This factory churns out goods for export. And this is like a dream job for you. Your salary is tied to the factory's output. The more the factory produces, the more that it exports, the higher your cut. So when the factory does well, you earn more money. Now, for decades, China has been the world's manufacturing hub. So your factory has obviously thrived. And by extension, you have earned massive amounts of money. But in recent years, business has been tough. The Wuhan virus shut down your factory for several months, and now with a global slowdown, your factory has started losing business. As a result, you have started losing your earnings. Plus, there's an overall slowdown in the Chinese economy. Now, typically, when growth falls, things become cheaper. Prices of goods go down when growth falls. But here, your earnings have also fallen, so you can't even afford the cheaper products. This is what experts call a deflation, when prices of goods reduce, but consumers still cannot buy them because their earnings have also taken a hit. The situation is called deflation, and Morgan Stanley is concerned about the deflation in China, particularly in the real estate sector, which makes up a big chunk of the Chinese economy. In this country, property prices are falling. At the same time, the burden of debt is rising. So you have big payments to make, big EMIs to pay, but the property you bought is losing value. This is proving to be a major challenge. In order to address it, Beijing has pumped money into the property sector. Fresh announcements were made this week. China is giving out over $500 billion for housing projects. And this is in the form of loans.
By year-end, we will expand the scale of credit loans for the whitelist of housing projects to $562 billion. The coordination mechanism of urban real estate financing seeks to include all eligible housing projects in the whitelist.
But it may not be enough because the problems with the Chinese money run much deeper. Mere tinkering or just band-aids won't do. What they need is surgery. Beijing needs to roll out structural reforms. That's the view of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. It believes that China's growth will remain below 4% if it continues on the same path.
I've been arguing that China is at the fork on the road. If they continue with their current model, which is export-led growth, there would be trouble. Why? Because the Chinese economy has grown to a point when China's export is no more a minor factor in global trade. And don't rely on some miracle that would retain an export-led model in this large economy as a viable vehicle.
She said it. The stimulus measures are inadequate to bring its economy back on track. China needs to look beyond exports. And there is another risk on this front. Chinese products are increasingly facing Western scrutiny. First, it was the Chinese EVs, electric vehicles, which have been slapped with tariffs in the West. Now the US is coming after Chinese drone makers. It has sanctioned 2 Chinese companies. They apparently made drones for the Russian military. So the writing is on the wall. The future of Chinese exports looks bleak, riddled with tariffs and sanctions. The market for Chinese products is steadily shrinking. So internationally, this market is shrinking, and at home, incomes are drying up. Millions of Chinese workers are jobless and possibly under the burden of debt. Stimulus packages alone won't fix all of this. Unfortunately for China, though, their leader is busy shooting the messengers and picking fights with the world. Now to the United States. Yesterday we told you about the battle of Fox interviews. Today we have a winner. It's Kamala Harris. Her first interview on the network drew more than 7 million viewers. Donald Trump's was around 3 million, so Harris clearly won this round, at least in the ratings. But it's a completely different story on the betting market. Americans are hedging their bets on the presidential election, and Donald Trump is in the lead there. I guess the question is, does any of it translate into real votes? Our next report tells you.
It was the battle of Fox interviews, Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. Both appeared on the network on the same day. Both tried to woo voters. And who came out on top? Well, the ratings say it was Kamala Harris. She sat down with Brett Breyer, the chief political anchor for Fox. The conversation was short, yet there was a lot of back and forth. The interview drew an audience of 7.1 million viewers. That's how many people tuned in to watch it. It's an impressive number, especially when you compare to other Fox programs. In fact, Brett himself attracts an audience of 2.3 million people on an average every day. So this was nearly triple of that. The Harris campaign sees this as a major win. She went on Fox to appeal to the conservative voters, and this seems like a job well done. But guess first time's the charm. This was the Democratic presidential nominee's first appearance on Fox News.
What is happening right now?
So of course, viewers were curious. At least that's how the Republicans are trying to frame it. And how did their own candidate do? Well, Trump is no stranger to Fox News. He's given multiple interviews to the network. The day's town hall, however, wasn't a crowd puller. It got around 3 million viewers. So looks like Harris won the battle of ratings. But when it comes to betting, Donald Trump seems to have the edge.
And I like that. I like that. I like that.
America is betting on the presidential elections, and they're spending big money on it, over $2 billion. There are 3 main platforms: Kalshi, Predictit, and Polymarket. On Polymarket, Trump has a 60% chance of winning. Kamala Harris is at 39%. On Kalshi, Trump is leading with 57% compared to Harris's 43%. Predictit too shows Trump in the lead. So the market sentiment is clear. Donald Trump is in the lead. And many believe these rating markets are a better indicator than opinion polls. That's because of 2 reasons. 1, it updates in real time. And 2, it involves a lot of money. Elon Musk also agrees. He has time and again highlighted how Trump is leading in the betting markets. But critics say betting markets like these are hardly accurate. In fact, they are quite volatile and easily manipulated by anything from a triumphant post to a random comment. National polls show both candidates neck and neck. According to an average of national polls, Kamala Harris is slightly ahead in the race with 48.5%, while Trump has 46.1%. Now, this is within the margin of error, which is 2 to 3%. And right now, campaigning is in the final stretch. Billionaires have also joined the political fight. As the race for the White House heats up, will we get a second Trump term? Or will Kamala Harris become America's first female president? We'll find out in less than a month.
Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, that's America's choice. But it's a choice that could decide the fate of a country some 9,000 kilometers away. I'm talking about Ukraine. It's fighting a war with Russia. The war began in 2022. It's been more than 2 years, and it shows no signs of ending. Russia continues with its strikes. Ukraine struggles to hold on to territory. The front lines remain unchanged, and all of this is making one man quite nervous. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. On Wednesday, he presented what he calls a victory plan. It's his plan to win this war. Today, he arrived in Brussels, pitching it to European leaders and allies.
If we start now and follow the victory plan, we can end this war no later than next year. Dear friends, I presented the victory plan to our parliament, our people, and I have their support. And I think it's so important to have unity in our country. The goal of the plan is that it strengthens not only Ukraine, but also our entire community.
You can call it wishful thinking, but Zelensky believes that he can end this war by 2025. How? By following this grand victory plan. It has 5 broad points. Number 1, invite Ukraine to join the NATO. Zelensky wants his country to become a part of the NATO military alliance ASAP. Number 2, Ukraine's defenses should be beefed up, which includes a lot of things, but Kiev really wants, what it really wants is the permission to hit Russia with Western weapons. Number 3, a non-nuclear strategic deterrent package. Ukraine wants it deployed on its soil. Zelensky believes it will keep Moscow away. Number 4, continuing the Kursk offensive. Ukraine thinks that this incursion was a big win. It wants to hold on to Kursk and use it as a bargaining chip. And finally, number 5, protection of Ukraine's natural resources. Kiev wants the US and the EU to do all of it. So those are the 5 broad points. There are 3 more which have been kept secret. Ukraine has shared them only with its partners. So with this grand plan in hand, Zelensky is on a mission. He wants the West to embrace it. First, he met the European leaders, then he headed to the NATO headquarters.
dear Volodymyr, it is great to have you here at NATO headquarters. I look forward to the day that Ukraine is here as a member of this alliance. And until then, we will continue to do all that we can to assure Ukraine prevails. This is vital for our shared security.
Some supportive words there from the new NATO chief, but words are all that Zelensky got. He wanted a NATO membership, he wanted a formal endorsement of his plan. He got neither. Obviously, that would make anyone feel snubbed, but it won't be the first for the Ukrainian president. So he promptly changed tack. He went from pitching a victory plan to issuing an ultimatum.
What is the way out? Either Ukraine will have nuclear weapons, and then this is defense for us, or we should have some kind of an alliance. Today, we do not know any effective alliances other than NATO.
Nukes or NATO? Zelensky says those are his two options. He is not getting a NATO membership, that much is quite clear. So will he go nuclear now? Well, this is what Zelensky said.
Which one of these big nuclear countries suffered? All of them? No, just Ukraine. Who gave away nuclear weapons? All of them? No, just Ukraine. Who is fighting today? Just Ukraine.
Quick primer here. Ukraine became independent in the year 1991. It inherited thousands of Soviet nuclear weapons. In 1994, Ukraine gave up those weapons. It transferred all of those weapons to Russia. And this was in exchange of security. And Ukraine blames the West for this. Its security guarantees are gone, so Kiev wants the nukes again. But it's easier said than done. You can't just ask for nuclear weapons and have them. I'm sure Zelensky knows that too. So why is he pulling off this stunt? Because he is grasping at straws. America goes to polls on November 5th. If Kamala Harris wins, it will be business as usual, more aid, more support. But if Donald Trump wins, Ukraine could be in trouble. Zelensky knows that. Trump has not been his biggest fan. He does not like the idea of American aid to Ukraine, and he blames Zelensky for this war.
I think Zelensky is one of the greatest salesmen I've ever seen. Every time he comes in, we give him $100 billion. Who else got that kind of money in history? There's never been. And that doesn't mean I don't want to help him, because I feel very badly for those people. But he should never have let that war start. That war is a loser.
That was Donald Trump at a podcast. He called Zelensky the greatest salesman. Sounds like a backhanded compliment. It has rattled the Ukrainian president for sure. And it's not just him. US President Joe Biden has barely 3 months left in the White House, and right now he's in Berlin for a swan song trip, a visit to assure allies and discuss the war in Ukraine.
America and Germany are the two largest supporters of Ukraine in its fight for survival as a free and independent nation. As Ukraine faces a tough winter, we must sustain our resolve, our effort, and our support.
Now, Joe Biden can offer assurances, allies can pledge support, Zelensky can give ultimatums, but the fact of the matter is the world is moving on. As of today, Zelensky's biggest challenge is not really Russia. It's the waning support of the West. And in a war of attrition, that can be deadly. The Ukraine war once inspired global unity, but now it's more like yesterday's news. So Zelensky is battling both Russia and a fading spotlight. Speaking of fading spotlight, King Charles is in Australia. He landed in Sydney today along with his wife, Queen Camilla. Charles has paused his cancer treatment for this 6-day visit, which comes at an interesting juncture when relations between Australia and the monarchy are fraught. Australia has 6 state governments. All their leaders have boycotted the visit of Charles. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has repeatedly urged the ouster of the monarchy. Amid protests and little public interest, could Charles be the last monarch to visit Australia? Here's a report.
All hail the King. At least in Australia, where an absentee head of state is finally paying a visit. We are talking about King Charles III. Today, he landed in a wet and windy Sydney, along with his wife, Queen Camilla. They were greeted by Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister, and other dignitaries. The Sydney Opera House was illuminated with a montage of their images. This visit has been touted to be a historic one, as this is Charles' first trip to Australia. He has become the first reigning king of Australia to visit the country. His mother, Queen Elizabeth II, was the first reigning monarch to ever visit Australia. Trip marks Charles' first visit to one of the 15 realms where he remains the head of state, which includes Jamaica, Canada, and New Zealand. But it nearly didn't happen. In February, the Buckingham Palace announced that the king had cancer and all his public-facing duties were stopped. So a trip to Australia seemed nearly impossible. With a 24-hour-long flight, a huge time difference and days of royal engagements. But Charles has paused his cancer treatment to visit the land down under. And the tour has been curtailed with no evening engagements, no state dinners and no trips late in the day. A visit to New Zealand has been dropped from the itinerary. The Australia visit has been slimmed down to a 6-day affair where Charles and Camilla will attend a reception hosted by Albanese, visit the Royal Australian Navy and sit down with Indigenous representatives, among other engagements. Next, he will travel to Canberra, Australia's capital, followed by Samoa, an island country in Polynesia, to attend the Commonwealth meeting. So Australia is like a long, brutal layover for Charles, which is inviting both little public interest and an opportunity for protests. All 6 Australian premiers or leaders of the state governments have boycotted Charles' visit, citing work commitments and cabinet meetings. Monarchists have called it insulting because the tour is a crucial opportunity for both Republicans and monarchists. This royal visit comes at a royally complex time for Australia. The momentum for an Australian republic has slowed down. Albanese has been vocal about the fact that he wants the country to become a republic. In 2022, they appointed a minister to oversee the possible transition, but later, the minister was given a different brief. Plus, if Australia wants to oust the monarchy, they will have to hold a referendum and it will cost about $200 million. So there is little political or public desire to spend that money, thanks to the cost of living crisis. Australia last held such a referendum in 1999 when 54.9% people voted against replacing the Queen with an Australian head of state, like a president. And last year, 46% people said they would vote no in a republic referendum. So for Republicans, this is progress, but it is not progress enough with only 54% Australians willing to say yes. The prospect of ousting the monarchy seems distant at best. But the last thing Australia needs, amid its cost of living crisis, is a red carpet rolled out for a pointless crown, which serves no purpose in the real world.
Every day we look for stories from Africa. And every day we see the same stuff. Corruption trials, attempted coups, terror attacks and so on. And it makes you wonder, does nothing good happen in Africa? Or is it always just bad news? Well, it turns out it's not an Africa problem, it's a media problem. Just like anywhere in the world, Africa has good and bad news, but global media tends to focus on the bad. It's always poverty or security crises. And this stereotype has a financial cost, $4.2 billion. That's how much negative coverage is costing Africa. Let me explain how. This report was prepared by 2 agencies, a consultant group named Africa Practice and an advocacy group named Africa No Filter. Their methodology is quite interesting. First, they picked 4 African nations, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa and Egypt. Then they picked countries with similar social and economic conditions outside Africa. Malaysia is similar to Kenya and Nigeria. Denmark is similar to South Africa, according to them, and Thailand to Egypt. And finally, they compared election coverage in these countries. Guess what they found? In African polls, the coverage was mostly negative, things like violence and rigging. And elsewhere, just your normal stuff, things like top candidates and issues. Consider Kenya and Malaysia. 88% of articles about Kenya's election were negative. In Malaysia, it was just 48%. Do you see the bias? This bias can affect your finances, especially your loans. Most lenders are charging risk premiums in Africa, basically more interest than normal. They say Africa is a risky bet, our money may or may not be safe there, so we will charge you more. If you correct this narrative, if you cancel this risk premium, Africa's interest rates could reduce by 1%, which translates to $4.2 billion. Do you see how powerful narratives are then? They can make or break economies. Just think back to the early 2010s. Every global outlet was talking about the same thing: Grexit, the looming exit of Greece from the European Union. Spoiler alert, it did not happen. But the paranoia did not help. It shook investor confidence further. The Western media does a lot of this, by the way. They define countries in set terms. Mexico is always drug cartels and gang violence. Japan is advanced but meek. Russia is still dreaming about the Soviet Union. South Asia is poor brown people, and West Asia is rich brown people plus terrorism. It's not just the news media. Movies also spread such narratives. You may remember Slumdog Millionaire. It romanticized slums and poverty in India. The fact is, only 5% of Indians live in slums. I could say the same about some of these global indices like ease of doing business or passport power rankings or travel safety rankings. They have a direct impact on a country's economy. Yet the methodology is not always perfect, which is why narratives have become strategic. Some countries have clearly weaponized them. For example, there's something called the CNN effect. It's named after the US news channel, but it applies to media in general. How media coverage can influence domestic and foreign policy. Al Jazeera is doing it right now. They're funded by the Qatar government. And they're building consensus against Israel and Gaza. How? By constantly publishing stories against Israel and by ignoring what the other side did. So every country basically has two options. Either shape your own narrative or let others shape it for you. China is doing the first. They have spent billions expanding their media footprint. They also share content with foreign agencies, of course, only the favorable type. Africa is stuck with the second option. Their media landscape is not as developed, so others are shaping their narrative for them. It's a challenge for India too. Some of these Western outlets have decades of head start. So now's the time to catch up because our world runs on power and narratives can be deadlier than missiles. Apparently, one sip is all it takes to either levitate with glee or cringe with disgust. There is no in between. In case you haven't guessed it yet, I'm talking about Grammy-winning singer Dua Lipa and her viral recipe that is splitting the internet. Diet Coke with jalapenos and pickle. But if there's a hall of fame of bizarre food combinations, it has a long list. Nutella and mayonnaise, cereal in orange juice, and pasta with dal makhni. Here's a report.
This is Grammy Award-winning pop star Dua Lipa. And this is her latest creation. It isn't a catchy song or a quirky dance move, it's a bizarre recipe. Dua Lipa has gone viral for taking Diet Coke, mixing it with pickles and jalapenos, and drinking the deadly concoction. She shared this video on TikTok, the holy grail of all things strange. She received around 10 million views and mixed reactions. Agreement, curiosity, disgust, and blind faith. Now that's some radical optimism. But despite the roller coaster of comments on social media, people across the globe are trying the drink, including celebrity chef Gordon Ramsay. He made it, he tried one sip, and he clearly wasn't levitating. So Dua Lipa has split the internet. But time and again, people unite in their taste for weird food combinations. The latest one is mayonnaise and Nutella, a savory condiment paired with a sweet treat. Now, one may call this an assault on Italy's beloved hero, but alas. Though if you're on the side of those who want to pursue this curious culinary journey, we suggest you start with breakfast. Apparently, milk is out, and orange juice is the new fan favorite. No matter the food pairing, be it Oreos or cereal, orange juice is everywhere, even when it doesn't make sense. Speaking of which, there are some new favorites for snack time as well, like pickles with cheddar cheese and fries with sugar powder. The classics are making a comeback as well, like French fries with milkshakes. As disgusting as it may sound to some, there are people who've loved this combination for generations. Of course, there are cultural differences, but the real crazy lies in cultural unity. Take, for instance, Indian and Italian cuisine, and voila, you get pasta in dal makhani sauce. What about Japan and India? There's butter chicken sushi burrito. After all, here in India, bizarre food combos seem to be out of this world, and not in a good way. Let's introduce you to Fanta omelette and Maggi milkshake. And if you have a sweet tooth, there's Oreo pakoda, ice cream roti, and samosa ice cream. Now, we aren't saying this in poor taste, but most of the bizarre food combinations on social media are designed to be that way. It's designed to provoke, to invite reactions. And this is a sign of our times. So, culinary chameleon or not, feel free to take a sip of pickle coke or cereal juice. At best, you'll like it. At worst, you'll have a story to tell.
We usually make fun of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, but yesterday they did it to themselves. A full-on roast session. Ahead of voting, the Americans have a dinner tradition. Catholic charities get together in New York and they host a dinner for both candidates. It's called the Al Smith Dinner. Now, the mood is pretty light. Even the candidates are expected to mock each other. But let's just say some of the jokes were pretty rough. Not exactly friendly banter. Trump attended the dinner in person while Kamala Harris sent a recorded video performance. The former president did reasonably well, but the vice president bombed spectacularly. Listen to this.
And these days it's really a pleasure anywhere in New York without a subpoena for my appearance. Anytime I don't get a subpoena, I'm very happy. Tradition holds that I'm supposed to tell a few self-deprecating jokes this evening. So here it goes. Nope, I've got nothing. We're called White Dudes for Harris. Have you seen this? White Dudes for Harris. Anybody know? Are some of you here? White Dudes for Harris. Doesn't sound like it. But I'm not worried about them at all because their wives and their wives' lovers are all voting for me. The only piece of advice I would have for her in the event that she wins would be not to let her husband Doug anywhere near the nannies. Just keep him away. That's a nasty one. That's nasty.
Is there anything that you think that maybe I shouldn't bring up tonight?
Well, don't lie. Thou shalt not bear false witness to thy neighbor.
Indeed, especially thy neighbor's election results.
Just so you know, there will be a fact checker there tonight.
Oh, that's great. Who?
Jesus.
We are 19 days until the election and likely a civil war. And, you know, I'm nervous. You know what I mean? It's like, this is my first civil war, guys.
And now it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. Italy's auto workers marched through the streets of Rome demanding more work. Tons of rubbish wash into Bosnia's main river after flash floods in the country, and Mexico gears up for the Day of the Dead with a giant skeleton exhibit. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1867, the United States took possession of Alaska. America bought Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. That's around 2 cents per acre. Moscow wanted to sell it because it was too far away and difficult to defend. Alaska became a U.S. state almost a century after the purchase. Today, it is the largest state in the country with vast natural resources. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend. News.